I never expected that defending my peaceful garden would lead to a neighborhood uprising against our tyrannical HOA president. How was I supposed to know that adopting 20 rescue dogs would expose years of corruption and finally give our veterans the community support they deserved? The morning dew still clung to my prized roses as I stepped onto my back porch, coffee mug in hand. It was my daily ritual, watching the sunrise over my meticulously cultivated garden that had become my therapy after returning from Afghanistan 3 years ago. The garden wasn't just plants and soil, it was my sanctuary, my way of finding peace. After losing my right leg during my final tour, I nearly dropped my mug when I spotted 4 men in matching polo shirts hammering wooden posts along my garden's perimeter. My heart raced as I grabbed my cane and made my way down the pathway. "Excuse me," I called out, struggling to keep my voice level. "What exactly are you doing on my property?" The youngest worker looked up, confusion crossing his face. "This isn't technically your property, sir. We're installing the fence for the new community dog park." "Dog park?" I repeated, certain I'd misheard. "This is my garden. I've maintained it for 3 years." The crew foreman approached, clipboard in hand. "Are you Mr. Travis Mitchell, 47 Oakwood Lane?" "Yes, but—" "The HOA approved this space for the new community dog park last month." He flipped through his paperwork. "Notices were sent out to all homeowners." I shook my head. "I never received any notice. And this garden, I've put thousands of dollars and countless hours into it." The foreman shrugged. "Take it up with Ms. Harrington. We're just doing our job." Victoria Harrington had been the Pinewood Estates HOA president for nearly a decade. Rumor had it she'd gotten her ex-husband removed from the board when he voted against her pool renovation proposal. I scrolled through my emails and HOA communications while the workers continued their assault on my garden. Nothing about a dog park appeared in any of the notices I'd received. My neighbor Elaine, a retired schoolteacher who often brought me cookies in exchange for fresh herbs, hurried over from her porch. "Travis, I just saw the workers. What on earth is happening?" I explained the situation, my frustration mounting. With each word, "That's ridiculous," Elaine said. "They can't just take your garden. The HOA bylaws require a supermajority vote and individual notifications for any property reassignments." Apparently, Victoria found a way around that. Back inside, I called the HOA office. After being placed on hold for 20 minutes, Victoria's assistant informed me that Ms. Harrington was in meetings all day, but could squeeze me in tomorrow afternoon. Lunchtime, the workers had removed half my vegetable beds. My heirloom tomatoes, grown from seeds gifted by my grandfather before he passed, lay withering in the sun. I'd started that garden the day after my medical discharge, when getting out of bed seemed impossible, and the phantom pain in my missing leg kept me awake most nights. I called Marcus, a fellow veteran who worked as a paralegal. "They can't just repurpose your property without notification," he confirmed after I explained the situation. "Check your deed and the HOA covenant. There's usually specific language about common areas versus private property." That evening, I pored over my home documents. The property line clearly showed the garden was within my lot boundaries. I assembled a folder of evidence: property surveys, photographs of my garden's development over 3 years, receipts for plants and materials, and printouts of the HOA bylaws highlighting the notification requirements. When sleep wouldn't come, I hobbled outside with a flashlight to survey what remained of my garden. The workers had installed fence posts around the entire perimeter. My meditation bench had been moved to the corner, partially buried under piles of dirt. The small memorial stone for my service dog Zeus, who'd helped me through the worst of my PTSD before succumbing to cancer last year, had been carelessly tossed aside. I picked up the stone, wiping away the dirt with my thumb, and felt something inside me shift from despair to determination. This garden wasn't just plants, it was my healing journey etched into the earth. Victoria Harrington might control the HOA, but she had severely underestimated what a combat veteran was willing to do to protect what was his. The next morning, I received a mass email from the HOA announcing the grand opening of the Pinewood Paws Dog Park in 2 weeks. The message boasted about the previously unused space being converted for the community's benefit. Attached was a photo of Victoria smiling beside what had been my blooming hydrangeas just days ago. My blood pressure skyrocketed when I read the final paragraph. Special thanks to our generous residents who donated this beautiful space for our furry friends. Victoria Harrington's office smelled like expensive perfume and artificial flowers. She kept me waiting 30 minutes beyond our scheduled appointment time, a power move I recognized from military bureaucrats. When her assistant finally ushered me in, Victoria barely looked up from her computer. "Mr. Mitchell, I understand you have concerns about our new community project." Her voice carried the practiced patience of someone who viewed complaints as inconveniences rather than legitimate issues. "Concerns is putting it mildly," I said, opening my folder. "That garden is on my property according to the deed. I never received notification about converting it to a dog park, and I certainly never donated it as your email claimed." Victoria sighed dramatically, finally meeting my eyes. "The area in question falls within the HOA's jurisdiction for community enhancement. Section 12B of the Covenant gives us authority to repurpose underutilized spaces. My garden isn't underutilized. I've spent 3 years cultivating it. It's where I grow my food and manage my PTSD symptoms. While your military service is commendable," she said with the artificial sweetness of aspartame, "many residents have requested a dog park for years. The board voted unanimously last month. I'm on the email list. There was no notification about this vote." Victoria tapped her manicured fingernails on her desk. "We sent notices through standard mail. Perhaps yours was lost." I pulled out the property survey. "Regardless, this garden is within my property line. You can't just take it." She barely glanced at the document. "Our records show that area as a flex space under HOA management. Previous owners granted an easement." "That's impossible. My lawyer reviewed all documents during purchase." "The easement agreement was established years ago," Victoria insisted. "Perhaps your lawyer missed it." This felt eerily familiar to conversations with military officials who'd already made up their minds. I tried a different approach. "I'm happy to discuss alternatives. There's the vacant lot by the playground that would make an excellent dog park." "That area is designated for the new community gazebo," Victoria replied. "Listen, Mr. Mitchell, the decision has been made. The community will benefit greatly from this addition." "What about my benefit, my right to my property?" Victoria's smile tightened. "I understand change is difficult, especially for veterans who are accustomed to certain environments. But the HOA exists to make decisions for the greater good." Jaw clenched at her condescending tone. "Show me the easement document. I'll have my assistant search for it. In the meantime, the project continues as scheduled." I left her office with my anger barely contained. On my way out, I noticed a framed photo of Victoria receiving a Community Leadership Award. Standing beside her was Judge William Hammond, who I recognized as the head of the County Property Board. Back home, I called Marcus again, who agreed to help me search county records. Meanwhile, the fence installation continued. By sunset, my garden was completely enclosed with heavy-duty chain link. The neighborhood's reaction was mixed. Some residents stopped by to express sympathy, while others seemed excited about the dog park. One neighbor, Derek Chen, revealed something interesting. "The only reason I voted for this was because Victoria said you'd agreed to donate the space since you were moving soon." "Moving? I have no plans to move." Derek looked embarrassed. "That's what she told everyone at the meeting. Over the next few days, I learned Victoria had spread various stories. I was moving to Arizona. I couldn't maintain the garden due to my disability. I wanted to contribute to the community. All lies to justify her land grab. The project accelerated. Workers installed water fountains, waste stations and benches. My request for the supposed easement document went unanswered. Victoria stopped taking my calls, and her assistant insisted the board was researching the matter. I sought legal advice, but without the allegedly existing easement document, we couldn't proceed effectively. The attorney warned me that fighting the HOA could be costly and lengthy. One evening, I noticed a small gathering of residents by my former garden. Victoria was giving them a tour, pointing out features of the nearly completed dog park. I approached, the group using my cane for support as I navigated the uneven ground. "A grand opening this weekend," Victoria was saying. "We're so fortunate to have this space for our community." "Excuse me," I interrupted. "I'd like to clarify something for everyone. This space was my private garden, taken without my permission." Victoria's smile didn't falter. "Travis, we've discussed this. The easement—" "Show them the easement document," I challenged. "Show them the proof this is HOA property." Several residents shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't the appropriate time," Victoria said firmly. "If you have concerns, follow the proper channels. I've tried. You've ignored me for 2 weeks." An older man spoke up. "If there's documentation, why not share it? Seems reasonable." Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "The HOA doesn't need to justify its decisions to every resident. Our authority is clearly established in the covenant." After an awkward silence, she steered the group away, but not before I noticed several doubtful expressions. I'd planted a seed of doubt. That night, while struggling with insomnia, I browsed local news articles about HOA disputes and discovered something interesting. 3 other Pinewood residents had contested property reassignments in the past year. All 3 eventually sold their homes and moved away. Then I found a real estate listing that made my blood run cold. Victoria's husband owned Pinnacle Property Group, the same company that had purchased those 3 homes at below-market rates and resold them months later for substantial profits. The pattern seemed clear. Create dispute over property. Pressure. Homeowner until they sell, profit from the distressed sale. Was I next on their list? I closed my laptop and stared out at the newly installed lights, illuminating what had been my sanctuary. Victoria might have connections and power, but she'd made a critical error in choosing me as her target. Military service teaches you many things, including how to fight strategic battles against seemingly insurmountable opposition. If Victoria wanted a war, I was prepared to give her one. The grand opening ceremony for Pinewood Paws was scheduled for Saturday morning. I spent Friday night formulating my counterattack. If Victoria was using her power to bully residents and profit from property manipulation, exposure was my best weapon. But first, I needed irrefutable evidence. I contacted Elaine, Derek, and several other sympathetic neighbors to gather information about past HOA decisions and meetings. Marcus called with news that county records showed no easement on my property, confirming my suspicion that Victoria was bluffing. "What she's doing might constitute fraud," Marcus said, "but proving it requires documentation of her claims." "She's careful never to put these things in writing," I replied, recalling how she'd made verbal promises she never fulfilled. "Then we need to make her put it in writing," Marcus suggested. The solution came from an unexpected source. My cousin Amelia ran the county's largest animal rescue, Forever Paws. When I called to vent my frustrations, she offered an idea so audacious I initially thought she was joking. "You're serious?" I asked. "Dead serious," Amelia replied. "If they're giving you lemons, make the sourest lemonade they've ever tasted. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather for an outdoor ceremony. Victoria stood at a podium, set up near the entrance to my former garden, now unrecognizable with its artificial turf and plastic play equipment. About 40 residents gathered for the ribbon cutting, including several board members and local business sponsors. Pinewood Estates has always prioritized creating spaces that enhance our community, Victoria announced, her voice carrying through a portable speaker system. Today, we're proud to unveil our newest addition. Her speech faltered as the unmistakable sound of barking approached. Heads turned as I appeared at the corner of the street, accompanied by Amelia and 2 shelter volunteers. Each of us handled multiple leashes connected to a parade of enthusiastic canines, 20 rescue dogs of various breeds, sizes, and energy levels. "What perfect timing!" I called out cheerfully. "We've brought the first official guests for the dog park." Confusion rippled through the crowd as we approached with our barking, tail-wagging entourage. Victoria's smile transformed into a grimace. "Mr. Mitchell, what is the meaning of this disruption?" "No disruption at all," I replied, maneuvering through the crowd with 5 excited dogs pulling at their leashes. "I'm embracing the community spirit by adopting these wonderful animals from Forever Paws Rescue. Since I no longer have my garden to maintain, I've decided to become a foster home for rescue dogs." Victoria's face paled as she glanced at the dogs. A Great Dane with boundless energy, a drooling Mastiff, 3 hyperactive terriers, and 15 other assorted canines, all eager to explore their new park. "You adopted all these dogs?" "Foster to adopt," I clarified, handing Victoria an official-looking document. "And I've registered them all as emotional support animals for my PTSD. The paperwork is in order, as required by HOA regulations." As Victoria scanned the document, her composure crumbled. The crowd watched with growing interest as Amelia and the volunteers began releasing dogs into the fenced area. The animals immediately began exploring, digging at the freshly laid turf, and marking their territory on the new benches. "You can't bring 20 dogs into this community," Victoria hissed, keeping her voice low to avoid creating a scene. "The covenant limits households to 3 pets maximum," I smiled pleasantly. "Section 8.3 of the bylaws makes exceptions for registered support animals. No limit is specified for those." The Great Dane bounded over to Victoria, covering her cream-colored pantsuit with muddy paw prints. She shrieked and jumped back, drawing everyone's attention. "Since you've generously provided this dog park using my former property," I continued loudly enough for nearby residents to hear, "I wanted to show my appreciation by making sure it gets plenty of use. These dogs will visit daily, sometimes multiple times daily, for extended play sessions." Victoria pulled me aside, her voice a furious whisper. "This is unacceptable. I'll have the board revoke your exception." "Before you do that," I said, "you might want to read this." I handed her a letter from Marcus's law firm outlining my property rights case, including the fraudulent claims about the non-existent easement. "I've also invited Channel 7 News to do a feature on how our HOA supports veterans and rescue animals. They'll be here in 20 minutes. The blood drained from Victoria's face as she read the letter. "This is blackmail. This is consequences." I corrected. "You lied about my property, my intentions, and my rights. Now you have 2 choices. Restore my garden and admit to the board that no easement exists, or I go public with everything, including how properties disputed by the HOA mysteriously end up being purchased by your husband's company." Her eyes widened at this last revelation. "How did you—" "Military intelligence training has its advantages," I said, which wasn't entirely true. It had been simple internet research, but the implication worked. While Victoria processed her predicament, I noticed board member Richardson approaching with Derek Chen. They'd overheard enough to look concerned. "Victoria, is there something going on we should know about?" Richardson asked. Victoria attempted to regain her composure. Just a misunderstanding about pet regulations. And about property lines, easements and real estate practices, I added. I was just explaining to Ms. Harrington that I'd be happy to discuss these matters at the next board meeting, with full documentation, of course. Richardson frowned. What documentation? Before Victoria could intervene, I outlined the situation. My property being repurposed without proper notification, the non-existent easement, and the pattern of disputed properties ending up with Victoria's husband's company. These are serious allegations, Richardson said, looking troubled. Victoria's phone rang, the news crew calling to confirm directions to the event. The noisy dogs, the gathering crowd of curious residents, and now the impending media attention created the perfect storm of public scrutiny she'd been carefully avoiding. Perhaps we should postpone the ribbon cutting, Richardson suggested, looking at the chaos unfolding in the dog park, where one enterprising terrier had started digging up the water fountain installation. Victoria glared at me with undisguised hatred. "This isn't over," she warned quietly. "You're right," I agreed. "It's just beginning. The board meeting is Tuesday, correct? I've prepared a full presentation on HOA governance and property rights. I'm sure everyone will find it enlightening." As Victoria stalked away to deal with the arriving news crew, Elaine approached me with an approving smile. "You know she'll try to retaliate," she warned. I watched as my army of rescue dogs thoroughly christened their new park, effectively claiming it as their territory. "Let her try," I replied. "I survived Afghanistan. I can certainly survive suburban warfare." The Channel 7 news segment aired Monday evening, but not with the story Victoria had anticipated. Instead of a puff piece about a community dog park, the reporter focused on Bark Fest, my impromptu adoption event that had successfully placed 15 rescue dogs with local families. The closing shot showed a golden retriever mix named Sergeant snuggling with an elderly veteran, while the reporter praised Pinewood Estates for supporting both veterans and animal rescue efforts. Victoria's attempt to control the narrative had backfired spectacularly. By the time Tuesday's board meeting arrived, my inbox overflowed with supportive messages from neighbors and local veterans groups. The community center meeting room was packed beyond capacity, with residents spilling into the hallway. I arrived early, setting up a display board with photographs documenting my garden's transformation over 3 years, alongside property surveys and highlighted HOA covenant clauses. Amelia brought Buddy, the one dog I'd decided to keep, a 3-legged German shepherd who'd immediately bonded with me over our shared experience of adaptation. Victoria entered with forced confidence, flanked by 2 board members who seemed decidedly uncomfortable. When Richardson called the meeting to order, he announced a change to the agenda. "We'll begin with an investigation into recent property designation decisions." For the next hour, I presented my case methodically, just as I'd learned to brief commanding officers, facts first, emotions second, solutions third. I shared the documentation proving my garden was on my property, the lack of any easement records, and the pattern of disputed properties being acquired by Pinnacle Property Group. "While I can't prove intent," I concluded, "the pattern suggests a troubling correlation between HOA disputes and profitable real estate acquisitions." The room erupted with questions. Several homeowners came forward with similar stories, areas of their properties repurposed for community use after questionable board decisions. Victoria attempted to dismiss these as isolated misunderstandings, but her explanation grew increasingly strained as more residents shared experiences. The turning point came when Derek Chen, who'd recently joined the architectural committee, produced minutes from a private executive board session. "I was troubled by what I heard at Saturday's event," he explained, "so I reviewed our records. 6 months ago, Victoria specifically identified Mr. Mitchell's property as strategically valuable for future development. There was never any resident request for a dog park in that location. Victoria's face flushed crimson. Those were confidential proceedings, which doesn't make them legal or ethical, Richardson countered, looking disturbed. Victoria, did you direct the board toward decisions that benefited your husband's company? This is absurd, she sputtered. My husband's business dealings are entirely separate from HOA matters. An accountant from down the street raised his hand. Actually, as a board member, any potential conflict of interest should have been disclosed and documented. I've reviewed our records for the past 3 years and found no such disclosures. Victoria gathered her papers. I don't have to sit here and be ambushed by these ridiculous accusations. You might want to stay, said a quiet voice from the back. A woman in a crisp pantsuit stepped forward. I'm Diane Morales, County Property Commissioner. A resident contacted my office with concerns about potential ethics violations. The room fell silent as Diane explained that the county would be launching an official investigation into HOA governance practices at Pinewood Estates. Victoria's husband's company would also face scrutiny regarding its property acquisition patterns. By meeting's end, the board had voted to suspend Victoria pending investigation results and passed 3 immediate resolutions. Restoration of my garden would begin the following week. All recent property designations would be reviewed, and a community committee would identify an appropriate location for an actual dog park, with proper procedures and transparent decision-making. As people filed out, many stopped to thank me, shake my hand, or share their own stories of frustration with HOA governance. Richardson approached with a formal apology and a request. Would you consider joining the board? We need someone with your attention to detail and commitment to fairness. I promised to consider it, though truthfully I was more interested in returning to my garden than entering HOA politics. The restoration began promptly, with several neighbors volunteering to help replant. Victoria resigned from the board before the investigation concluded, and she and her husband quietly listed their Pinewood Estates home for sale. I learned later they'd relocated to another state, their property development ambitions presumably following them. The most meaningful outcome, however, emerged unexpectedly. During the Barkfest chaos, I'd connected with several fellow veterans. In the community, our shared experiences, both military service and battles with faceless bureaucracies, created an immediate bond. We began meeting weekly in my gradually reviving garden. You know what this place needs? Suggested Mike, a former Navy medic who'd adopted one of the rescue pups. A dedicated section for service dog training. The idea resonated. Within months, my restored garden expanded to include a small training area where veterans worked with rescue dogs, preparing them to become service animals for other veterans in need. We called it Operation New Leash on Life, and it quickly gained support beyond our neighborhood. 1 year after the dog park debacle, my garden hosted its first official graduation ceremony. 6 rescued dogs, trained by veterans for veterans, received their service dog certifications. The event made local news again, this time as a heartwarming story about community cooperation and healing. As I watched a young Marine with PTSD receive his trained companion, I reflected on how differently things might have turned out. Had I simply accepted Victoria's power play, I would have lost my sanctuary. Instead, by standing firm, I'd not only reclaimed my space, but transformed it into something that helped others find their own path to healing. The memorial stone for Zeus now anchored a special corner of the garden dedicated to service animals. Beside it, a simple plaque read, "Sometimes the battles fought at home require as much courage as those fought abroad." Elaine joined me as the ceremony concluded, Buddy leaning contentedly against my prosthetic leg. "You know," she said, "when you first moved in, People wondered if you'd fit into the community. I smiled, watching veterans and neighbors mingling in the garden that had become something much more than my personal sanctuary. I think I found my place. The HOA still existed, of course, but under new leadership focused on transparent governance and genuine community building. The gazebo Victoria had planned was eventually built, not on contested property, but in the community centre courtyard where it served as a gathering spot for neighbourhood events. And the dog park? It finally found a perfect home on legitimately designated common ground, funded through proper channels and named Forever Paws Park in honour of the rescue organisation that had helped me turn a land dispute into a community transformation. Sometimes, standing your ground isn't just about protecting what's yours. It's about creating something better than you ever imagined. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't retribution, but rebuilding something so wonderful that everyone benefits from. Your victory. As spring arrived the following year, our new Leash on Life program gained national attention. A segment on a major morning show featured our veterans and their service dogs, highlighting how a neighborhood dispute had blossomed into a model community program. The garden thrived with new purpose. Where my solitary sanctuary once stood, there was now a vibrant hub where veterans found camaraderie, rescue dogs found purpose, and the community found healing. Together, we'd created something none of us could have built alone. The most surprising development came 6 months later. I received an unexpected letter from Victoria, postmarked from Arizona. "Your garden changed more than just the neighborhood," she wrote. "It changed me too." She explained that after moving, she'd reflected on her actions and begun volunteering at a local animal shelter. The letter included a donation to our program, substantial enough to fund training for 5 more service dogs. "Sometimes we need to lose something precious to understand what truly matters," her letter concluded. I showed the letter to Buddy, who offered his typical wisdom, a gentle head tilt and soft eyes that seemed to understand everything. On the anniversary of our confrontation, we hosted a community celebration in the garden. Veterans, rescue dogs, neighbors, and even some former board members gathered among the flowers and vegetables that had become a symbol of resilience. As twilight fell, lanterns illuminated the pathways. I watched a young veteran with PTSD laugh, for the first time in months, as his service dog playfully nudged his hand. Nearby, children carefully harvested tomatoes under Elaine's watchful guidance. Sometimes battles choose us. Sometimes the most unexpected conflicts lead to the most beautiful resolutions. And sometimes a garden becomes more than just plants and soil. It becomes the foundation for a community's rebirth. Standing there, with Buddy leaning against my prosthetic leg, I finally felt something I hadn't experienced since before my deployment. I was truly home.